I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was...
Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the person sleeping next to you, the one you've trusted for years, has been living an entirely different life, a life so dark and twisted that it would make the most hardened detective lose sleep at night. While names like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer dominate true crime conversations, there exists a shadowy gallery of criminals whose stories are so disturbing, so brilliantly sinister, that they've somehow slipped through the cracks of public consciousness. These aren't your typical monsters. These are the ones who rewrote the playbook on human depravity, yet their names remain whispers in the darkest corners of criminal history. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on three of the most twisted criminal minds you've probably never heard of, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some stories are too unsettling to become mainstream. Let's begin our descent into darkness with a man who turned an entire community into his personal hunting ground. His name was Rodney Alcala, and while some true crime enthusiasts might recognize him as the dating game killer, the full scope of his calculated madness remains largely unknown to the general public. In 1978, at the height of his killing spree, Alcala appeared as a contestant on the popular television show, The Dating Game, and actually won. The Bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw, later refused to go on the date with him, saying he gave her creepy vibes. Her intuition quite literally saved her life. But here's where Alcala's story becomes truly chilling. He wasn't just a serial killer, he was an artist of manipulation and psychological torture. A photographer by trade, Alcala would approach young women and children, convincing them to pose for his camera. Authorities eventually discovered a storage locker containing over 1,000 photographs of unidentified individuals, many in compromising or vulnerable positions. To this day, dozens of these people have never been identified, and investigators believe many of them became his victims. The true body count may never be known, but Alcala was convicted of killing at least 8 people, though experts believe the number could be over 100. What made him particularly twisted wasn't just the murders themselves, but the way he'd torture his victims, strangling them until they lost consciousness, then reviving them, only to repeat the process. He wanted to prolong their suffering, to play with life and death like a child with a toy. Now, let's travel across the Atlantic to meet Dagmar Overby, a Danish serial killer whose crimes are so horrific that even in the early 20th century, when Denmark still had the death penalty, the public was shocked. Between 1913 and 1920, Overby worked as a professional child caregiver in Copenhagen, a profession that gave her access to the most vulnerable victims imaginable. Young, unwed mothers would bring their babies to her, desperate for discretion in a society that harshly judged them. These women trusted Overby with their most precious treasures, and she betrayed that trust in the most unimaginable way. Overby murdered between 15 and 20, 5 children under her care, though she was officially convicted of 9 murders. Her methods were brutally efficient. She would strangle the infants, drown them, or burn them alive in her masonry heater. Then, in perhaps the most disturbing twist of all, she would dissolve their small bodies in her stove or bury them in her garden, her yard literally becoming a graveyard of innocence. What drove her wasn't madness in the traditional sense, but pure greed. She would collect fees from desperate mothers, promising to care for their children, then eliminate the evidence and pocket the money. When caught, she showed no remorse, treating the whole affair as if it was simply a business transaction gone wrong. The Danish public was so outraged that even though she was initially sentenced to death, the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, where she died in 1929, having shown no remorse or emotion about her crimes. But perhaps the most psychologically complex criminal mind on our list belongs to a man named Carl Panzram, an American serial killer, rapist, an arsonist whose life reads like a masterclass in how society can create its own monsters. Born in 1891 in Minnesota, Panzram's childhood was marked by poverty and abuse. By age 11, he was sent to a reform school for a minor theft, and it was there that the systematic brutalization began. He was beaten, tortured, and repeatedly sexually assaulted by staff members who were supposed to reform him. Instead, they created something far darker. Panzram's criminal career spanned over 2 decades, during which he claimed to have murdered 21 people and committed thousands of burglaries, arsons, and sexual assaults across multiple countries. What makes Panzram truly twisted isn't just the violence itself, but his absolute, unwavering hatred of humanity. He wrote in his autobiography, penned while in prison, "In my lifetime I have murdered 21 human beings, I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings. For all these things I am not in the least bit sorry." This wasn't a man asking for forgiveness or understanding. This was someone who had looked into the abyss of human cruelty and decided to become it. What's particularly disturbing about Panzram is his intelligence and self-awareness. He understood exactly what he had become and why, even corresponding with a young prison guard named Henry Lesser, who would later help preserve his autobiography. Panzram wrote with chilling clarity about his transformation from victim to predator, describing how each act of violence against him hardened his heart until there was nothing left but rage. When he was finally sentenced to death for killing a prison worker, he refused all appeals and told his executioners he was hanged in 1930, and with his death, one of the most disturbing psychological profiles in criminal history was closed. What connects these three twisted minds isn't just their crimes, but the way they operated in the shadows of their respective eras. Alcala hid behind charm and creativity, using his camera as both weapon and alibi. Overby exploited society's darkest shame about unwed mothers, knowing her victims' families would be too afraid of scandal to ask questions. And Panzram became a mirror reflecting back all the violence that had been inflicted upon him, multiplied and amplified to monstrous proportions. They understood human psychology, social blind spots, and how to exploit the vulnerabilities in the systems meant to protect us. These stories remind us of an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones we've never heard of, the ones who slipped through the cracks or operated in errors before modern forensics could track their every move. They're the cautionary tales that never made it to the mainstream, but their darkness is no less real, no less important to understand. If you found this deep dive into criminal psychology as fascinating and disturbing as I did researching it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is dedicated to bringing you the untold stories, the forgotten cases, and the criminal minds that true crime documentaries somehow miss. Drop a like on this video if you want to see more content like this, and leave a comment telling me which case shocked you the most. Trust me, we've only scratched the surface of history's darkest secrets, and there are dozens more twisted minds waiting to be explored. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones hiding in plain sight.